Look at this map of Europe and the wider world right now. NATO is facing threats it was never designed for. So how does an alliance built during the Cold War stay relevant when the entire global landscape has shifted beneath our feet? When NATO was founded in 1949, the threat was clear and singular: the Soviet Union. It was a straightforward equation: Western democracies versus communist expansion. For decades, that mission was crystal clear: contain Russia, deter invasion, build a shield across Europe. But here's what happened. The Cold War ended. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. And suddenly, NATO had to ask itself a terrifying question: what are we for now? For a while, NATO seemed almost irrelevant. The 1990s were a moment of optimism. Francis Fukuyama wrote about the end of history. People thought great power conflict was over. NATO expanded eastward, bringing former Soviet satellite states into the fold. Poland joined in 1999. Hungary and the Czech Republic joined at the same time. But this wasn't charity. This was about creating a buffer zone, a security perimeter that would prevent any future Russian resurgence. And that expansion, it turned out, was incredibly important, because Russia didn't stay collapsed. It didn't transform into a liberal democracy. It reasserted itself under Vladimir Putin, starting in 2000. And when it did, NATO's eastern members weren't sitting ducks anymore. They were protected. They had the collective defense guarantee. That mattered more than anyone realized at the time. But here's the thing about modern threats. They don't always come from where you expect them. The 9/11 attacks changed everything. Suddenly, NATO was fighting terrorism in Afghanistan, not defending territory, not deterring a superpower, hunting extremists in the mountains. NATO adapted. It had to, because terrorism doesn't respect borders. It doesn't announce itself with military parades. It hides in caves and cities and uses the internet to recruit. So NATO learned asymmetric warfare. It learned counterinsurgency. It learned that modern conflicts aren't about massive tank battles anymore. They're about intelligence, precision strikes, and winning hearts and minds. Then came 2014. Russia annexed Crimea. And suddenly, the old Cold War playbook wasn't history. It was current events. NATO members on Russia's border started getting nervous. Really nervous. And NATO had to make a choice. Do we treat this as a one-off? Or do we recognize that great power competition is back? NATO chose to adapt. It increased troop presence in Eastern Europe. It strengthened its eastern flank. It began running military exercises that looked less like peacekeeping drills and more like preparation for actual conflict. NATO understood that Russia was testing the boundaries, seeing how far it could push before NATO pushed back. Now let's zoom out across the entire geopolitical landscape and understand just how much NATO's world has changed. The threats aren't just military anymore, they're hybrid. Russia doesn't just invade countries, it spreads disinformation, it hacks power grids, it meddles in elections. It uses energy as a weapon, cutting off gas supplies to freeze out uncooperative nations. In 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, it also launched massive cyber attacks against NATO members' infrastructure. Hospitals, power plants, water treatment facilities. That's the kind of hybrid warfare we're talking about. China is building military bases across the world, projecting power in ways that threaten NATO members' interests in the Indo-Pacific. Cyber attacks happen constantly. According to NATO's own assessments, member states face thousands of cyber incidents every single month. Critical infrastructure is vulnerable. Supply chains are weaponized. The battle space has expanded from traditional military domains into cyber, space, and information warfare. And NATO has had to evolve to meet all of these challenges simultaneously. This is where NATO's transformation becomes really interesting, because the alliance isn't just adding new capabilities, it's fundamentally rethinking its entire strategic posture. In 2022, NATO released a new strategic concept. This document is basically NATO's mission statement for the next decade, and it's a dramatic shift. For the first time, NATO officially named China as a strategic challenge. Not a threat, a challenge. But that language matters. It signals that NATO is no longer just a European alliance focused on Russia. It's a global alliance that understands the interconnected nature of modern security threats. If China destabilizes the Indo-Pacific, if it threatens Taiwan, that affects the global economy. That affects NATO members. So NATO is expanding its thinking beyond Europe. But here's what really matters. NATO is also becoming more militarily capable. Member states are spending more on defense than ever before. In 2023, NATO members collectively spent over $1.2 trillion on defense. That's a staggering number. Germany, which had been relatively pacifist for decades following World War II, is now committing massive resources to military modernization. They've announced plans to spend over 100 billion euros on military equipment over the next few years. The Nordics are joining NATO. Finland joined in 2023. Sweden joined in 2024. Historically neutral countries, with centuries of non-alignment policy, are now full members. That's not a small thing. That's a fundamental shift in European security architecture. These countries looked at what Russia did in Ukraine and said, we're not going to be vulnerable to that. We're joining the alliance. And NATO welcomed them, because it understood that expansion strengthens the collective. More members means more resources, more military capability, and a larger deterrent against aggression. Now, NATO's adaptation isn't just about military hardware and troop deployments. It's about intelligence and information warfare. NATO has established a dedicated cyber defense center in Tallinn, Estonia. It's developing doctrine for space warfare. It's creating rapid response forces that can deploy anywhere in the world within days. It's building partnerships with non-NATO countries to extend its influence and gather intelligence. Japan, South Korea, Australia, these are all partners now in NATO's strategic thinking. Because the world is smaller, threats move faster, and NATO has to be able to respond globally, not just defend Europe. Here's something that really shows how much NATO has changed. The NATO Response Force, or NRF, is now larger and more capable than it's ever been. This is a military unit that can deploy to anywhere in the world within 30 days. It's got air, ground, sea, and cyber components. It's trained for everything from conventional warfare to humanitarian disaster response. And it's constantly evolving. NATO runs exercises where it practices defending against Russian aggression in the Baltics, while simultaneously responding to a cyber attack and dealing with disinformation campaigns. That's the modern security environment. You can't prepare for just one threat. You have to prepare for multiple, simultaneous, interconnected threats. Consider what happened during Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Russia launched coordinated cyber attacks against Ukraine's military and civilian infrastructure at the exact same time as its kinetic military operations. That's the playbook now.
It's simultaneous attacks across multiple domains.
NATO has to be able to defend against that and respond in kind. So here's what I want you to understand. NATO's transformation isn't just about military hardware or troop deployments. It's about an alliance learning to operate in a world that's fundamentally different from the one it was created for. It's about democracies working together to protect their interests and their values. It's about recognizing that security is shared, that threats are interconnected, and that standing together is stronger than standing alone. That's the essence of NATO's modern role. And that's why understanding NATO is essential to understanding global power dynamics in the 21st century. If you want to stay informed about how the world actually works, about the forces shaping global politics and security, you need to understand NATO. You need to understand how alliances function, how nations cooperate, and how power actually operates in the real world. This isn't abstract theory. This is the framework that determines whether we have peace or conflict, stability or chaos. So pay attention, because NATO's choices and how it adapts to new threats will shape your world for decades to come. Thanks for watching. If you found this breakdown helpful, please subscribe to the channel. We break down complex geopolitical issues every single week so you can understand the world better. And if you want to dive deeper into how NATO works, how alliances function, and what's really happening in global security, check out the video we've linked in the description.